Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this on today's online event, which is about remote working. So we've got a panel of Softcat technical experts today on this call, which can last about 45 minutes. And the idea behind this is we put together a slide deck, which we will share with you afterwards if you haven't already got it, which essentially is a flow. Which James will explain in a second. But today we're going to focus on some of the frequently asked questions, and this is it's an open forum. There is a Q&A section at the end if we have time, but we've done one of these already. And actually, what's worked really well is if you have any questions, please just submit them straight away, and we'll try and get them answered. This has been recorded, and it will be available on Softcat's website at the end of the day. Okay, so James, could you just kick us off and explain why we're all here?
Not a problem. So just to echo what Ebow said, thank you for taking the time to dial in. I can only imagine the pressures and the stresses you guys must be under in the public sector, trying to respond to some of the government announcements yesterday and the remote working challenges. I know from speaking to some colleagues in public sector, healthcare and local authorities, they're sort of looking at 20% of the workforce already working remotely, and some unique challenges in regards to the public sector operations on how to address that. And that's partly the reason for hosting this, and also hosting a public sector specific version of this for you guys. As you'll potentially see from the slides that are being shared, Ebow and the team at Softcat have put together a service continuity, business continuity workflow in regards to what questions need to be asked, what actions you guys need to be taking, what things organisations need to be considering to allow remote working effectively, securely, and appropriately at the right time for the right people. This session is to sort of plug those gaps, because our workflow focuses in 4 areas: devices, application and data, how you get that application and data to the user through whatever medium you've landed with the device or the type of connectivity, and then the overall collaboration. So how are they going to communicate, share, call each other, attend meetings, collaborate on documentation. This session is a Q&A session. It's to fill those gaps. Yes, we've got a workflow that asks the right questions or gets you to ask the right questions, but what we want to do is fill the gaps that are specific to what you want to do and the challenges that you have, because you're all going to have different technology platforms. Your colleagues in local authority will have a different challenge to potentially healthcare. You may be accessing the same network along HSCN, but healthcare have smart card authentication. How do we get around that? How do we get a GP into their devices, into their applications securely? What do we do with your non-frontline workers, so finance, HR, IT, and so on? So this session really is to cover what we've seen from our customers. As Ebow said, we've just done a session earlier this morning with some of our corporate customers, and it worked really well getting those questions in through the Q&A section and answering those as we move forward. But we have had a number of questions already in from our customers around these 4 areas, around what we can do or what they need to do with the technology they already have to enable remote working and respond to the challenges that we're seeing. So we want to go through that, and we've got some specialists on the line, some guys on the tools guys and girls on the tools that know this inside out and are very close to our customers and yourselves to sort of answer those questions. Where appropriate and applicable, I'll try and stay quiet, but if I think there's something specific around a challenge in the public sector or one of the verticals, whether that be education or local authority or healthcare, I'll chime in. But please, I can't stress this enough, this is your session. Your time is very important, responding to what's going on at the minute. If you have any questions, specific or high level at all, please submit them and we'll do our best to answer them. If it's pertinent and specific to your organisation and confidential, just drop us a note through the Q&A and we'll contact you offline. But this is your session. We want to make this as valuable and use this time as effectively as possible.
Okay, thanks, James. The first section, we're going to be covering the first part of the components, which is devices. And as we've always said, we want you to think about making the challenge as small as possible. So that's when we go through the workflow. Some of these things you may have already thought of, but we're trying to just fill in the gaps in between. So we'll hand over to devices first and some of the questions we're getting asked. I know, Rob, you're here. We might even have John Gladstone on the call too. So this is for you, really. First question, if there's no new stock left in the channel, what are our options?
Yes, like I said, this is Rob here. So there has been a lot more demand in recent weeks, especially over the past week or two. There's been a lot more of a run on, especially the UK stock channel for where we normally go for distribution, for example. So on things like i5, 8 gig, 256, your fairly standard laptops and desktops, stock is pretty much non-existent at the moment. So especially compounded with Intel shortages. What I'm expecting is that even as China gets a bit better, we're still going to see factories dealing with big backlogs. We've seen a lot of customers order an awful lot of stock. So the key question at the moment is either looking to do build-to-order units, and potentially that can average about 4 weeks, but I've seen much longer, I've seen a lot quicker, or be flexible around specification as well. So it depends on internally what you can manage in terms of lead time, and any of your suppliers should be able to advise in terms of what they can get hold of and what's possible there. But considering things like i7s or 16 gig, for example, looking at convertible laptops, or looking at something else in terms of how you deliver that can be really useful. You could look down CapEx and OpEx routes here. We're seeing lots of customers just to get stock, looking at various leasing options as well. And if it's urgent, then potentially rentals are a possibility as well. So probably I'll just hand over to John just to explain a bit about what the options are in terms of rentals. They're broadly similar, but John, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So what I would say is that the rental market, it definitely also replicates what we're seeing in the channel. So customers that are desperate for their workers to get hardware for them to be able to work at home from a mobility perspective can certainly visit the rental market. I would probably say we're probably, as a industry, rented the best part of 50,000 units already across the UK. It's unfortunately a supply and demand market, and there are many different ways and avenues that we can try and help customers get that rental kit. And the second user market is currently the more beneficial market, and that's what we're seeing customers trying to get hold of at the moment. But I would say that even now that those supplies are looking pretty scarce as well.
Just to chime in on that, guys, sorry. From a public sector procurement perspective, there's no rhyme or reason that there is any there should be any procurement blockers in being able to do this. So if you do need to take out a rental agreement with providers that you haven't necessarily worked with before, or you want to fulfil a hardware requirement in a short time frame and are looking at routes that you've not looked at before, the framework depth that a lot of organisations have in the channel, Softcat being one and just one, is there to allow you to be able to do that to be able to transact. And partners like Softcat, doesn't just have to be Softcat, but partners in the channel can liaise with your procurement teams. So if you do need to move fast and you do have some constraints in that space, we and a lot of other providers in the same position as Softcat do have commercial teams that are quite that will be willing to speak to your procurement and finance teams to navigate through that, to make sure that we can find an effective supplier and fulfill whatever it is you need to fulfill.
Thanks, James. So back to you, John. What's the quickest, easiest way to configure equipment? What are the challenges? Sure, thanks, Ebow. So yeah, I'm sure some of the other architects on the call and the SMEs will have their own views on this. But working to basically business as usual standards. So being able to deliver services either on-site or off-site, such as imaging configuration via endpoints such as SCCM or Landesk, to name a couple, through to DRA testing and asset tagging. Basically, what we want to do is try and deliver that device as business as ready or user as ready as possible, either to a business or a residential address, so that user can use that device and get working and be productive as fast as possible. Okay, thank you. And is it just end-user equipment that can be rented? No, not at all. So, across the market, customers will be able to get access anything from an infrastructure perspective, such as servers, storage, from a NetSec perspective, switches, routers, firewalls, load balancers, etc. Anything that can really help them or replicate any hardware that they might need, or for Citrix, expand Citrix farms, just for an example. But from an end user perspective, the normal laptops, tablets, phones, desktops, and monitors, they're all available as well. As I said, from an end user perspective, we have seen a really large uptake in that. So those sort of areas are becoming a bit more scarce. And what happens to data? What happens to my data if we do this?
Yeah, so whoever you work with should be offering standard data destruction policies and services. So standard NCSC or CSG certified disk erasure 3-pass. That should be done as standard once the equipment's returned. If customers need to do it themselves, then by all means, speak to someone like Blanco or White Canyon. They'll be able to provide you licenses to do those disk erasure on your own site, or those same products will be used off-site once the devices are returned. And for public sector customers or PCI compliant customers and things like that desperately need, that can't send information back, then you should be able to remove the drives and have them shredded on site. So 2 mil, 6 mil, 11 mil, 22 mil is standard, but all those services can be offered on site or off site where required.
And how long can you actually rent equipment for?
So equipment can be rented for sure as a little time, down to 24 hours, up to 12 months. It really comes down to a financial piece. So, if the customer is going to rent for 24 hours, then it is going to be slightly more expensive. We're seeing most customers wanting to rent kit for 3 months, and we're seeing that as a minimal from suppliers as well. But, we always say work for 12 months as a maximum, because then you're basically stepping into the leasing territory, and it's probably more financially viable to take a lease option around something like that.
And what happens if you need to extend it?
If you need to extend it, then that shouldn't be an issue at all. You can negotiate that from day one. You can negotiate it after the term is coming close to an end. All partners should be able to offer you that roll price. And as I said, if you just want to roll it on a continual month-by-month basis, then that's generally absolutely no problem at all. But if you foresee a longer delay, so if your initial rental is for 3 months and you want to rent it for another 6, then you should be able to negotiate that as well. And make sure you're getting a good negotiation as well if you are extending it for a longer period.
Okay. I'm just going to jump through to one of the last questions here, actually, just so we can keep on time for this. Just a quick question on renting software, then we're going to go to Adam Louca. So can you rent software?
Yeah, so generally software isn't rented. What we would say is that if it comes as part of the device, so a preloaded operating system or part of an appliance, then yeah, absolutely, you'll get that licensing or that software as part of the rental. If you do want to rent other software, though, talk to your vendor or your local partner to make sure that they can offer that.
Okay. Adam Louca, Chief Technologist on the call today. What device security should we consider?
So you're going to need to consider a couple of bits here. Firstly is ensuring that the data that you're moving onto these devices is adequately secured. So ensuring full disk encryption is configured on those devices and an adequate passcode is configured. As you would expect, devices are going to be more distributed and more likely to be in unsecured locations. So ensuring the data security of that is very important. Secondly, based upon the type of data that you're transmitting onto that device, you might want to consider some level of onward security. So that could be restricting the ability to copy data off to USB drives. Alternatively, providing a solution for encryption on USB drives if they do need to be, data doesn't need to be moved that way. Finally, restrictions may either need to be reduced on things like printing at home, and actually some data handling guidance should be provided to users to tell them how to manage physical information, because I expect to see that people will try and either replicate some of their working methods at home, so that could be printing things off to annotate it or to provide notes, and actually I could see scenarios whereby people are leaving potentially sensitive data on the side that could be taken as part of a burglary. So do think about your physical security angles as well, especially as this becomes a long-term working environment.
One of the things that was brought up through a conversation with one of my colleagues in healthcare is that a lot of organisations are having to loosen the security controls to enable a quick response to this remote working challenge. So I think that physical process check that you just referenced there, Adam, is really, really key in the sense that there is a tactical requirement to do this, but you definitely need to consider that longer term view, because this could be 14 days, it could be 14 months. And I think there is a risk with patient identifiable data and personal identifiable data, citizen information and so on that could end up printed out on people's desks or on personal iPads and so on and so forth. I think that consideration is really key.
I think just to echo what James says, but I think, my one bit of advice I give you is don't go chasing the sort of the high risk, the kind of crazy scenarios. It's going to be things like not doing full disencryption. It's going to be things like leaving a piece of paper out there that's going to cause us the most likely and reasonable risk. Let's get that sorted with relatively simple processes and not kind of worry too much about the, sponsor threat actors, people like that.
Okay. So I want to move on to the next section, which discusses applications, mainly covered by Julian Bauer and in fact you, Adam. The first question we're getting asked quite a lot is, mitigate the risk of data loss when staff use their personal devices. Can I provide a read-only experience to my users within SharePoint and Exchange Online, but not impact their productivity? Nice tough one to get started on.
Sure. What's implied there is you're likely going to have the scenario where you have your users accessing corporate data from their personal device, whether you've managed to procure them and manage the device or not. But whether you're using 365, you can obviously naturally access these resources from home. But you can put controls in place to really prevent, I suppose, downloading, copying, and printing of data within those applications. So that being Exchange, Teams, OneDrive, and SharePoint, and really just preventing them from removing information from the browser. You can still work with attachments, download attachments within OneDrive, edit documents, and work within the suite that you're used to, and obviously the applications you're used to using, but not use the rich client access. But with staying in that ecosystem, you're preventing any information leaving that and going to the local storage on the device. Just to build on that, another piece is this security wrapping per se is quite nifty, but actually can be extended to other SaaS applications that sits outside of Office 365. Using Microsoft Cloud Security can wrap that wrapper around those SaaS solutions too. So, for example, you're using Dropbox, you can also prevent information leaving there within your defined rules. You can answer that one.
And if my organization uses Office 365 Pro Plus, are my users able to install a copy on their devices? Probably a quick answer there, but...
Sure. So that's just an obvious point. You're likely using Office Pro Plus already within your organization to provide the rich clients, the Office suites to your users. There's a license up to 5 installations of that on workstations and up to 5 on mobile devices. So it's definitely a time to allow users to install those applications and obviously use them to access your resources. With that comes some security sort of risks, but I'm sure we're highlighting some of those today.
Thank you. And one for you, Adam, how should I secure my applications?
Yeah, so you should consider a couple of points here. Firstly, around ensuring that you have adequate authentication mechanisms. So ensuring that applications are using several forms of authentication. So not just a username and password based approach. Do also take into considerations potentially more legacy applications that you might have given access to the internet as part of this process. So ensuring that they're either protected by a network layer, such as a VPN with a multi-factor authentication, or alternatively, you're using some type of application proxy, whether that's a web app proxy delivered through Azure, or alternatively something like an F5 out there, but just ensuring that you've got the right appropriate level of authentication in front of your applications. The second part of this is also then considering your vulnerability management program. So we've all seen relatively recently, we've had vulnerabilities in things like Pulse Secure, which was a VPN technology, but also in Citrix NetScaler. So actually ensuring that these publicly facing systems are adequately patched and aren't running any known vulnerabilities. So just stepping up that vulnerability management process to ensure that you're adequately prepared. If you're not using a vulnerability scanner today, you can pick up a copy of Nessus Professional for a relatively small amount of money. Alternatively, you can deploy something like OpenVAS, which is a free open source scanner, just to give yourself that visibility and ensure that you're not exposing any critical vulnerabilities on that element.
And you probably semi-answered this question, but I still think it's worth asking. So we had a question which was, with allowing my staff to work from their personal devices, I loosen my security posture. What immediate steps can I take to minimize this impact? You've probably gone a roundabout way, but can you attempt to answer that as well, please?
Yeah, of course. So the challenge with personal devices is you don't have control over the overall asset. So you have two kind of approaches here. One, that you actually enroll the asset in your device configuration technology. So that could be your MDM solution. It could be within your SCCM, and actually then apply policy to that device. So that would enable you to encrypt and secure the device and potentially deploy any agents to secure that. So that could be an antivirus agent. The challenge with that is you might get some level of user pushback as part of that, because you are now managing their devices if it was a corporate asset, and that will give you access to certain potentially identifiable logs and potentially private information on that asset. So that's a little bit of a difficult one. The second angle you can try and take is try and look at protecting the data. So we've talked a little bit about how you can use some of the read-only functions to kind of keep the data within a bubble, alternatively deliver that via a VDI style technology, or finally using things like data encryption to use to use classification and wrapping of the data to isolate and encrypt that data within a separate container, and also to allow controls over how well that can be shared and whether that data can be encrypted. So there's a number of different approaches, but fundamentally you are going to have to make some compromises if you are needing to use personal devices. The one thing I would say is just make sure that you've taken the relevant governance steps to understand the impacts of your decisions. You've clearly documented why you made those decisions. So in the event of a security incident, you have a level of due diligence that you've gone through as an organization to understand those decisions you've made.
Good point. Really good point. Okay, so just before we move on to the next section, just a reminder, this is, although we're doing all the talking, this is for you as well. So if you've got any questions along the way, please post them in the Q&A section and we will respond to them, hopefully immediately incorporate them into the responses. So yeah, the next section we'll talk about is the application delivery methods. So that's going to be predominantly Nathaniel, Greenwood, Graham Harris and Adam Louca again. So I think the first one's really for you, Nathaniel. When and why should people start thinking about expanding an existing RDS or VDI platform? Just because it's there, should they be using it?
Yeah, so the key thing is to simplify everything wherever you can. So break your users down into user groups and assess what applications those users need. In a public sector context, that could be very complex. Education, you can have many different departments with many different sets of applications. Healthcare, for example, you could have applications which have a heavy data set, things of that nature. So the key is to break down those applications and assess the relationship between the applications and the data that those applications access. There's two approaches across all the different disciplines. You can either bring the users to the data or the data to the users. There are some situations where you can't bring the data to the users. For example, if their applications are latency sensitive, or there are security concerns, or you're going across international borders and you can't, take that data out of the country, for example, or out of a secure environment. And in that case, you have to bring the users to the data, and that's where an RDS or VDI solution will come in. With regards to how you would go about expanding that, so take that application information that you've gathered and you've assessed, and use that to build a user resource profile, how much CPU and memory, etc., that you would need, exactly the same as you would do with a physical device. You can then pretty quickly assess whether you have the on-premises capacity or not, or whether you need to look at adding additional capacity on premises or spilling over into a cloud compute platform. And I know there's a lot of regulatory things when it comes to public cloud and whatnot, but overwhelmingly there are always options with the different providers. So the key thing is look at the applications, build out a resource profile, you then have you have options such as if you need to bring the users to the data. The key considerations then are bandwidth and licensing if you do have the on-premises capacity. Licensing depends on your solution. Citrix and VMware, they're hard licensing models, so they won't let you go above your licensing capacity. So in that kind of scenario, speak to the vendors, see if you can get some additional licensing in this situation. And so you've got your hardware, you've got your licensing, then you need to worry about bandwidth. A kind of a rough guideline is 1.5 meg for a light user, all the way up to say 15 meg for a heavy user, depending on what sector you are. If you're using AutoCAD, it's going to be that high end. If you're using imaging, things of that nature, it could be up to that high end. So think about your bandwidth for people accessing your VDI or RDS solution back to on-premises. If you don't have the on-premises infrastructure and you do need to look over into the cloud, you can do things such as Azure. You can do simple RDS on infrastructure as a service. You can do Windows virtual desktops to spin up some really quick capacity. AWS have things like Workspaces, and if you already have Horizon, you have the Horizon Universal License, which gives you access to Horizon Cloud. Citrix, you can upgrade to the Citrix Cloud License, which gives you access to their cloud desktops. So if you already have on-premises RDS and VDI, there's a range of considerations, but no matter which way you end up, you can always expand one way or another.
And you kind of started to touch on that, but because we're talking about cloud there specifically, one of the questions I've been asked lots is how quickly can we spin up a cloud-based VDI? So how long will that take?
So, yes, it obviously varies depending on the provider. However, a consistent across all of them is you need the minimum you would need is, say, for example, a VPN or an express route direct connect, for example, into the different providers. And a domain controller. They're kind of the consistent prerequisites amongst all the desktop offerings. Once you have those, depending on which solution you go for, you can spin up cloud desktops pretty quickly. But the key is to come back to those applications all the time. If your applications and data are sat on premises and you're looking to spin up cloud desktops, then the performance isn't going to be great, or it may not be great. So what you need to think of is, do I need to bring those applications and those data into the cloud as well? If that's the case, then it can take considerably longer, and you may have to accelerate a cloud adoption process to get the data into the cloud as well as the desktops.
Okay. Graham, I know you're there waiting in the wings. For all this to work, it does rely on good connectivity. So can the ISPs handle this extra demand that we're asking of them at the moment?
Thanks, Ebow. And yes, I think my section's probably a little bit more informational in the sense that as an IT department, you probably have less direct control over your end users or your home workers' personal broadband contracts. But I think my perspective is the ISPs are going to step up to the plate, and I think they want to step up to the plate and really deliver this and smash it out the park for us to work from home effectively. So some of the key messages that are coming through from the ISPs is that they do have capacity to meet demand when it peaks, and Openreach and Vodafone both have cited some work they've done back end of last year with Amazon Prime. It was to do with a lot of the live streaming of sporting events, particularly Liverpool and Everton, which had a large peak on their networks. So they're comfortable, they can handle it. From a support perspective, you will find that as people work more remotely, support teams are able to log in remotely to their networks and continue to provide the same level of support that we used to. And I think what we are going to see is a shift in the way the bandwidth is used on ISPs' cores. And what I mean by that is a lot of the big players, what they do is they kind of have a dual route to market over their core networks to sweat their assets. So typically you've got your 9-to-5 business use, which is a very key part of their core network delivery. When it comes down to the out of hours, those same people are going home and consuming consumer-based broadband over those same core networks, and so they kind of have that consistent flow. So the capacity is there. We're just going to see the traditional office-based connectivity from 9 to 5 shift more to the consumer home broadband access mechanisms. I think the only really key that is unknown at this stage is going to be around contention ratios and everybody logging in at the same time, what that's going to look like. But we can give our teams practical advice around turning off video, for example, and just using voice.
Fair. Adam, one that I mean, you've been asked a few times is, how do I scale my delivery mechanisms?
So there's a number of different ways you can consider doing it. Number one, if you've got a network-based approach, you're going to have to think about things like the VPN concentrators and where you're terminating those points on. What I have seen a number of organizations do who need to scale quickly is actually start to use cloud-based, so SaaS-based VPN remote access solutions. This is a relatively new area, but something called SASE, so SASE, so Secure Access Service Edge. And what these essentially are is these are an amalgamation of the SD-WAN technology space and also remote access coming together to provide you a secure connectivity fabric that runs over the internet. Fundamentally, what that means is that you get clients installed on endpoints and these terminate on cloud-based services. What's nice about this is that you don't have to run or manage any of that environment, and that scales automatically. So you kind of shift that burden onto that central service provider. And then what you essentially do is you connect a single point-to-point VPN into that cloud service that allows your users to access both on-premise and cloud applications. What's really nice about this tech as well is that it's globally distributed, so less of a challenge for public sector, but for our commercial clients, this provides actually connectivity in a local region, so provides a point of presence in potentially up to 60 or 80 different regions across the world. So there's some really nice ways to go about doing this, but number one, you've either got to just assess what methodology you're looking to use.
Thank you. Okay, so yeah, I want to go over on to the last section. So Steve, Burnley, Michaela, if you're ready. So this last section, we're going to be covering voice and video, which is effectively collaboration. So we've got the collaboration technical leads on the call today. So my first question, I think this is for you, Steve, is how do we make our telephony available for home workers?
Thanks, Ebow. So if you're looking to make your corporate telephony available for anyone working from home, there's basically 3 options for you. One option, which I'll cover first, is available to everybody, but then the others kind of depend on where you're starting from. So option 1, and I'm sure some people are going to consider this, is mobile only. So everybody owns a mobile phone. A large percentage of your staff may actually own a corporate-owned device, and you can genuinely consider just saying, right, share your mobile phones out, your mobile phone numbers out, and that's how we solve the problem. Especially if they're personal devices, you're going to need to have a think about legal implications of that, because you're now going to be exposing your voice channel to whatever else might be installed on that personal device. So there's call recording implication, things like that. You'll need to take internal legal advice. So at least in some areas of your organizations, that's not going to be suitable. The other 2 options, like I say, they depend a bit on where you're starting from. If you're already on a cloud platform, then that almost certainly has some form of work from home capability, whether it's an app on your smartphone or a download soft phone for your desktop, laptop device. Where you might struggle at the moment is the level of subscription or license that you have with that will not support work from home scenarios. In that case, what we're seeing is most providers in the market are allowing you to take 90 or 180-day step up or burst to a higher license level that will enable that work from home rather than work from an office. So that's your cloud platform option. If you're on an on-premise platform still, and that does still cover a good 80-85% of the market at least, if that's a relatively recent purchase, and by which I mean in the last 5 to 7 years probably, then it almost certainly has a work from home capability. The big question mark is whether or not you've actually enabled it. Now, if you've already got it set up, then some quick testing, away you go. If you haven't, then it's usually a little bit of time and effort from a pro services perspective to get it up and running, because it's not the simplest thing in the world. We're talking about real-time communications that need to blast through a firewall. So there's going to be some opening of firewall ports, some configuration on the PBX to enable that to happen. Usually you see that the licensing for this, you've probably already got it. It's the enablement that's the issue. And you're usually talking something like 2 to 3 days if you were talking, for instance, about a Cisco call manager. So those are kind of your 3 options at the moment from a standing start.
Thank you. And how do we get a web conferencing platform set up for people easily?
So web conferencing is actually going to be fairly easy for most people. So we're seeing that pretty much every major player in the web and teleconferencing market is offering 90 or 180-day trial stroke emergency options for people out there. So that's vendors like Microsoft, WebEx, 8x8, Fuse, RingCentral, the works. Not all of these platforms are the same, so you'll need to take a look at them, make sure you evaluate them, make sure that your requirements for a conferencing platform, such as getting a telephony dial-in, are available from the free offer that's available from each one of them. Don't assume that just because you're with Cisco, for instance, for telephony, that Cisco WebEx is going to be the default correct answer for you. It could be that Microsoft or 8x8 or someone else is actually a better fit for your requirements. So take your time and evaluate them. The other thing I'd note is that we're seeing, especially today, a lot of these vendors are reporting issues and downtime with these services. Microsoft had a very public issue yesterday. WebEx have had a fairly major issue this morning, and that's because they're getting massively overloaded with significantly more people dialing in and actually using these services than they typically expect, just because of all the free trials and free service that's being offered out there. That's getting addressed. It will take a bit of time just because of the amount of hardware and connectivity that needs to be scaled into those platforms. So don't necessarily make a decision based on there's a bad piece of press today or yesterday or tomorrow. Think about your actual requirements to cover you for the next 3 to 6 months, because that's the important piece. Finally, almost all probably has 365 in one flavor or another, which means you're going to be looking at Microsoft Teams as a possible answer to this question. Now, depending on what you have in 365 will depend on what's available to you, and I'll pass over to Michaela for that.
Perfect. Thanks, Steve. So, yeah, ultimately, the big question we're getting asked at the moment is, I've got Teams in my 365 subscription, but what can I actually do with that? So I would say every subscription that includes Teams will give you the ability to do instant messaging and have presence. But what you'll also have the ability to do is that kind of digital teamwork space. So channels, teams, co-authoring, and document sharing. Now, that is incredibly powerful when suddenly you've got teams that are working very closely together that are now remote. So one to definitely consider. From an actual meetings perspective, everyone outside of E5 will have the ability to join and host meetings from within the Teams client or a web browser if they don't have the Teams client. But if you want to be able to actually provide a dial-in for your users to be able to dial in via mobile or whatever, that is an additional licensing unless you have E5. So audio conferencing for those hosting and want to provide a dial-in. And then for users that want to take it that one step further and potentially use it from PSTN dial out, you will need a phone system and you will need a calling plan as well. Now, Microsoft has evolved massively over the last few years to be able to scale licenses up and scale them down quite easily, depending on what agreement you are. But all these services are quite quick and easy for you to roll out. So what I would say is speak to your licensing partner, your licensing specialist, to get some more clarity around what can and can't be done within your existing licensing agreement.
Just on the team stuff, from a public sector perspective, our colleagues in the NHS have access to Teams through NHS Mail. we've talked a bit about device security and data security. One point to raise there, when we talk about collaboratively working on information that might be patient identifiable, or if we're looking at multi-agency support hubs or MASH teams across local authority, police, healthcare and so on, using that NHS mail Teams subscription sits within the NHS mail boundary, so it's an NHS application, it's system, it's accredited, so any data within that meets the accreditation requirements for security, for patient identifiable data and so on. So that is a one-size-fits-all security and solution that will work really effectively, specifically for healthcare, but then also maybe potentially in the MASH services as well, where we've got multiple agencies all trying to work together. So I think that one's quite powerful in the sense that you're working on an accredited platform that's supported by NHS Digital and Essentia and meets all the security. That's not to say trusts and organisations aren't security compliant themselves, but it's a question that doesn't need asking if you're using NHS Mail, because it's someone else's accreditation.
Thanks, James. Steve, so we've got a bit of a question that we were unsure about whether we could answer succinctly. So over to you. How do I ensure critical processes such as finance payments are protected when face-to-face contact isn't possible? I know that's probably a 30-minute response that we could have from you, but in a couple of minutes, can you help us answer that?
Yeah, thanks, Ebow. So obviously, an awful lot of organisations' processes are built around the idea that you are sat in the same room as a team, you are able to ask someone a question, you're able to quickly get up and walk across the office. And when you're working from home, that's not possible. You know, we've changed the dynamic there. If your processes aren't completely automated and fixed in stone, then that's what stuff you need to be addressing, especially in the first week or two of this breakdown, this work from home, this lockdown scenario. And the only way you're going to be able to do it is to repeatedly hammer home. So effectively, a daily message reminding people of what the processes they need to follow are. If it's raising a purchase order and you don't have an automated PO system, then right, for orders over XYZ, it needs to go to this person for sign-off, then this person for sign-off, then this person for sign-off. It's going to be very easy for people when they're working from home to think that they can just bypass some of that. And it needs to be rammed home repeatedly, day after day after day. Some of your users are going to get very, very sick of those emails, but that's actually what you need to do to actually make this happen. In the longer term, if this lockdown does look like it's going on for 3 to 6 months, then that's where you need to start thinking actually about process, whether it's inside SharePoint or 365 in general, or through some other system, to actually force these things to happen in order. That's a slightly different question. It's something that some of you will probably start thinking about anyway once we're through this, but you may want to start looking at it now. 365 that actually enables this to happen and doesn't need much in the way of programming or scripting for you to actually create the stuff to make it work the way you want to. But it does take a bit of time and investment.
I think there's a when you talk about that longer term challenge that this might go on to for 3 to 6 months, some of our council colleagues will have contact centres that do take payments, and obviously they're office based. They'll be in a council location. Whether that can persist or not into the next 3 to 6 months if this lockdown continues. So I think those conversations from that strategic approach and some of the technical challenges in that space need to be considered, because people will still need to pay council tax. They'll still have bills to pay and parking fines, hopefully not me, but challenges in that space. So I think from a council perspective, less so in the NHS, I would imagine, but even potentially with education, there's going to be transactional elements for payments, I think, that are being made. So some of the colleagues in the public sector are probably going to be looking at that in the coming weeks. There's that tactical piece, but I do agree with your point. There needs to be a longer-term view on this.
Yeah. I mean, the good news in the contact centre space is that actually, if you're looking at your contact centre and thinking, well, it's office-based and you're trying to work out how you send people home but keep that working, then actually moving a contact centre into a cloud is paradoxically going to be a lot easier for you than moving a telephone system into the cloud, because frankly we usually only have 1 or 2 pilot numbers that we need to worry about. So doing that sort of work perhaps is not going to be as scary as you would be used to if you're thinking, how do I migrate a 300-seat contact center? As an on-premise platform, that would be a lot of work. In the cloud, not so much. And the other advantage of the cloud contact center technology is that a lot of integrations for taking payment over the phone, over the web, those sorts of things have already been pre-built. We're not going to be doing everything from scratch each time. So a lot of the APIs already exist. Plugging those into your existing credit card payment systems and things like that, those are all doable and may actually be much faster wins than you would be expecting. So, a typical cloud contact center RFI might be a 12 to 18-month experience. We could potentially shorten that a lot if that's the sort of approach you want to be taking, if you think you're going to need to go down that route.
Thanks, Steve. Okay. Well, yeah, thank you very much. That wraps up the majority of the questions, although there's always more that we could cover. So thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining. As I said at the start, the slide deck is available, so we can get that sent out through your account managers. And essentially, this was just a high-level flow. The output of today is we've collected all the questions that have come in throughout our calls, and the questions that we've already had will be put together into a frequently asked questions document. So question and answers, which we'll share with you as soon as we can. And this has been recorded, and like I said at the start, it will be available at the end of the day, so we'll go back and review anything. But thanks again, everyone, for joining, and thanks for your input. Bye.